What's going on, everybody? My name is Adam. Welcome to the Finding Purpose podcast. I will be your host. This episode is really special to me. Actually, I had a couple guests lined up that had to reschedule, and I was talking to my producers, and they had suggested that I did a solo episode and talked about myself. And while I considered it, I really didn't feel comfortable just sitting in a room by myself talking about myself and just sharing what's on my mind. I knew that it would be really scatterbrained. So I reached out to my sister. And throughout the previous 13 episodes, I've been incorporating bits and pieces of my story and some of the things that I've struggled with and have spoken about those close to me and how it has affected them. And, I reached out to Amber and I was like, listen, Amber, like, I really want you to be on the podcast because you had a front row seat to a lot of the things that I've spoken about that I went through, both with my struggles with alcoholism and the trouble that I got into. And then obviously we had that, shared revelation when it came to finding out that we're adopted. And, I really think it's a great opportunity for folks to hear from someone in my family just about the journey that I've been describing piece by piece with other guests. So Amber, welcome. I'm really, really happy that you join me. Amber is all right, and she's in Wynwood, Pennsylvania. Our family is originally from Philly on my mom's side. We are huge Eagles fans. Amber is slowly grappling with embracing the Eagles. And I really just kind of want to jump into it. One of the things that I know growing up with me must have been somewhat of a roller coaster ride for you as well. Talk to me a little bit about like our earliest experience, because, we started at Maimonides.
Yes.
And what was that experience like for you? And how do you think it kind of set the foundation for us and you individually for the future?
Honestly, I think when I look back at that at our time there, I guess I realized how out of place I felt. I think that's like the biggest thing. I don't know if you can relate to that or if you looking back, that's what you see too.
I mean, absolutely. We were the only brown people in the school. I mean,
Yes.
that was glaring. Being Sephardic Jews and everyone being Ashkenazic Jews, it almost felt like we were on the outside looking in when we were
Yeah.
there. I mean, just to paint a little picture for my viewers, like this school probably had 150 people max. I think I graduated with 10 people. Your class was, I think, even smaller.
Yeah, we had like it
Um,
was 5 of us total in the graduating fifth grade class.
Yeah, and everyone was from different places. So when we left there, this little hamlet of Judaism, everyone kind of scattered. Where some people went to Danbury, some people went to Darien. Like, what do you think that like that experience was like for you? Like when it came to just how shifting into public school, and back then our family was like really dug into the traditions. Like we celebrated Passover, we celebrated the high holidays, we celebrated Sukkot, all these holidays that like we practically spoke fluent Hebrew.
Yeah.
Do you feel like it set like a foundation?
I think somewhat, but I don't know. I guess I don't, when I look back, I don't really see it as us being that steeped in tradition as maybe it was for you. Like, I know we were in school, but then outside of school, we weren't ever really at home, I don't think. I always
Yeah.
looked at it as like, because we would go, like, if we came down to Philly, to see family for the Jewish holidays and we would celebrate with them, but on our own at home, we weren't really doing
Yeah, we
much
weren't lighting like
tradition
Friday
wise.
night
So
candles.
I always look at it as like we didn't like it was there in school and then in synagogue when we had Hebrew school prior to our bar and bat mitzvahs. But separate from that, I don't really our home base, I don't think we had a lot of like traditions, like Jewish related traditions. And I'm
Yeah,
not
it's
blaming
crazy.
you for that. It's just like what I see.
No, I feel like you're right, because once we graduated from there, fifth grade, sixth, seventh, eighth, we went to middle school in New Fairfield, and
Right.
there was a much smaller Jewish community, and the only thing that really
Yeah.
held us to the people from Maimonides was, what was it, Tuesdays or Thursdays when we went to the UJC, and that was really just so we'd be eligible to get bar mitzvah.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
so like I think that like also was kind of just slowly letting faith in Judaism kind of just fade almost. We kind of were just going through the motions as observant Jews. We got bar mitzvah. What was the transition to just like public school like for you? Because obviously for me, it was very different.
Yeah, I mean, obviously going from such like as a grade of five people to, having what, like 100 and let's say 50. We were split into teams for each grade, as you know. Uh, yeah, I would definitely say like I can remember some like mean girl-ness, like mean girl kind of behavior, especially on the school bus. Like as I transitioned, like starting out in sixth grade, nothing like awful, but like I definitely remember some of that. But I guess what I really like take away from it is you kind of realize how resilient kids are, because I mean I never told anybody about the way I was being treated. Like any bad thing that
Mm.
was happening, I just kind of like dealt with it or took it on myself, as I'm sure you did, and I think most kids do.
Is there a
So
particular memory that like stands out?
there was this one where I think I was in sixth grade, this girl was in eighth grade, this was on the bus. This is like not even anything big. It was like something so stupid. Like she was like putting her hair up in a ponytail and I was telling her that she had a bump in her hair and she like mocked me for saying that for saying that to her. And that was like the first and um like multiple things that happened. Also, I remember like as I started trying to make friends, because I didn't know anyone at that school system, a couple of girls that were on the same bus as us would get like kind of jealous because I was getting friendly with somebody that they were already friends with, kind of thinking I was probably trying to like steal their friends, when meanwhile it's like I'm just trying to make a friend. Like I don't know anybody here. I'm not trying to
Yeah.
steal your friend, but obviously that's not how you see it when you're in, sixth, seventh grade, middle school.
Yeah, no, totally. And then, obviously I followed you a year later and
Yeah.
you were in seventh grade. I was in sixth grade. When I joined you, did you feel protective of me?
To be honest, I think because it was such a big school, like I don't even remember us ever actually like seeing each other in school really. So I think if
Yeah.
it was maybe like a smaller school like Maimonides, maybe I would have felt that way. No, I sound like a terrible person, but
No, not at all.
I think it was just because it was such a big school that like I guess we were kind of just like both fending for ourselves. Like that was kind of the mentality of like we weren't really seeing each other. I don't really ever remember seeing you except for maybe like in passing or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just kind of how the school was designed with the different wings, where like,
Yeah,
the sixth graders were on one wing, the seventh graders were on the other wing, the eighth graders were
yeah,
all on a different wing.
yeah,
And we just kind of kept moving. And yeah, we would see each other in passing.
right.
But it's funny because like I always felt like the same way. I remember like we had that neighbor across the street, Ryan, and I remember he used to pick on me all the time. And you, I had a very similar transition into that, and like where like this is back before I started misbehaving. Like
Yeah,
sixth, seventh grade, I was still just kind of this nerdy little Indian dude, and I was getting decent grades and I was doing the right thing, keeping a low key. But like what you shared about in Maimonides Jewish day school, where we felt out of place, like that didn't end there.
yeah,
Like, and that's something that I always refer back to when I talk about my story, where I never really ever felt like I fit in as a kid.
yeah,
So then now we're going into like middle school, and we're leading up to one of the biggest revelations of our life, where we begin to discover truths about ourselves. You were the one who discovered this first,
yes.
and I'd love for you to share with my audience that story so that we could kind of paint the full picture of it.
Yeah, actually, it's funny that you bring it up because sometimes I can't remember if you were there or not and you heard the same thing I heard, or if it was just me who heard it. So basically, it was the weekend of my bat mitzvah. Last weekend of March, it ended up being like a 70-degree, beautiful day that year or that day. And
Was this
we were
98?
what's that?
98?
Yeah, 98. Yeah. So we were outside playing basketball. It must have been the next day after my bat mitzvah. We were outside playing basketball in the driveway. I think you were there too, and so was Dad's friend. I forget his name right now, but his Indian friend.
Ashok.
Yeah, and his two kids he had a girl and a boy that were both our same ages, so they were a year apart. She was my age, he was your age. We were literally in the middle of playing basketball, and I think her name was Anju, said, "My dad told us that you're adopted." And I said, "No, we're not." She said, "Yes, you are." I again said, "No, we're not." And she said, "Yes, you are." And I guess that was the end of the conversation. But yeah, I always forget if you were actually there and heard that or not.
I didn't, and that's like such a like important moment. In that
Yeah.
moment, what did you feel?
I think, I mean, because I was saying, "No, we're not," I think I was just kind of shocked or like, I was immediately saying like, "No, this isn't true," because, obviously if it was, I would have heard it from my parents, not from
Yeah,
you. So it was probably like shock. And then, I mean, that kind of turned into me like kind of doing the thing where I was like snooping around for the next couple months trying to find like proof to see if it was actually true or not before I said
fucking
anything.
Nancy
I guess,
Drew over there.
yeah, that's what I became. Because
Yeah,
I remember, so that
and
was the end of March, and then I remember it wasn't until I think like the middle of June, basically like whenever no one was home, I would like sneak around and look in the file cabinets and see if I could find proof. So I was trying to, see whatever I could find. It ended up being, like letters of like recommendation, basically, that our parents had gotten from other people who knew them well to
to
vouch for
qualify
them.
them as adoptive parents.
Yes, exactly.
So this whole time, you're the only one who has this secret. I don't know exactly. I know you revealed it to me only after you found proof.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I kind of forgot that part because I thought maybe you knew before, but I forgot.
I think you might have mentioned it to me, and I just like ignored you and shrugged you off. And
I
then
think that
like,
might have been what it was. I think like you know how they say like you find things out when you're, that's not the expression exactly, but when you're ready to hear something, that's when you hear it, something along
yeah,
those lines. So yeah, I think I maybe did tell you, and maybe you did brush it off. So then I was like, okay, now I have to find proof. So that's what I was like trying to do.
yeah, it's so funny because like, I would say that we were relatively close growing up. I mean, we would fight and we would bicker, and
Yeah.
but at the end of the day, like there would be nights when you were scared, and I would sleep on a sleeping bag on your floor, and like we always grew up and we were really close. And then, when you discover that, I do remember you mentioning it to me and me just being like, kind of the way you were with his daughter, just like, what are you talking about? Very
Yeah. Yeah.
dismissive.
Like just yeah.
Um, And then I remember the day that you actually showed me the paperwork. And,
Oh,
I think that was like shortly after you discovered it that June. And to be honest with you, like, and I think this is like a theme that I've kind of carried throughout my life where, like, when something big like that happens that I know is going to change things,
mhm.
like, I will suppress it, And I think I did suppress it, but like, that's really like when like the underlying resentment towards mom and dad like was born,
Yeah.
where when you presented solid evidence, and like, so we're in June now. You find out in late March. Now we're in June. We're kind of going through this summer. Um,
Do you remember that
you,
summer? Because I remember we basically spent the entire summer daring the other person to be the one to ask them if it was true. I don't know if you remember that, but I do remember
I
that very
don't.
well. And I knew, knowing my personality, I knew it wasn't going to be me who ended up asking, and lo and behold, it ended up being you.
Yeah. Um, so while I don't remember that, I remember the day that I asked very vividly.
Yeah, I
And
remember
I
the
remember
day
the
that you
date,
asked.
August 26th. I remember where we were.
I thought it
One of
was,
my first, you thought it was what?
oh, I was going to say, I thought it was
It was August 26th, 1998. Um,
okay.
and I remember that day so vividly.
Yeah, we were driving back from the town beach, remember?
Yep. I was sitting shotgun.
Yep.
You were sitting in the back.
Yep.
Um, and I don't know what happened. I think we literally, from what I remember, we were bickering, and we had a good day, but we were bickering. There's something happened in the car
Oh, okay. I don't remember the part.
where I just had an outburst, and I just went, "Mom, are we
Oh,
adopted?"
okay. I don't remember
When
the
I
out.
said that, what did you think? Because I remember the rest of the car ride was pretty quiet.
Yeah, it was pretty
Like,
quiet.
what was going
I
through
just
your head? We've never talked about this.
I think just like shock. I know we haven't. I think just like shock and like anticipation because it was like you asked the question and then she paused for a really long time from what I remember and then was like, "Yes." And then I don't know if she said we'll talk about it when we get home or if it was just like understood.
Yeah.
Then that's what happened.
It's so funny because like you remember like the buildup, and I remember like the events where you kind of blacked out memories of like the actual revelation. I
Yeah.
blacked out like the months leading up to it. Um,
Yeah,
and
that's
I
fun.
think that's just part of how like our minds are set up, you know?
Yeah, it's
Um,
kind of funny that you said that because speaking of the like build up to it, I was going to add before that part of the build up, like before you actually asked her the question, was we were trying to drop hints at them. So, because we were trying to get them to admit it to us. Like, somehow we would like keep bringing up adoption. Like we would be like, "Oh, did you hear that like so and so is adopted?" And we would bring up somebody from Maimonides that we found out was adopted. But we were saying like kind of negative things about it. And I think it was just because we were just trying to get them to like to admit it.
yeah, and I remember also saying things like, "Who do you think Amber looks more like?" or like something like that, something along those lines. Do you think Amber has my nose or mom's nose? And,
Oh, that's so funny.
and like saying things like that, and they never bit. So I remember we went home and we sat down. What was that conversation like for you? Like, I just want you to recall it.
I mean, from what I can recall, just kind of shocking, but I guess it was more how like afterwards, like once that conversation was done, even though what was said at the end was like you can always talk to us about anything or you can always ask us anything. Like that ended up really being it. There wasn't really any other conversation after that that was had. Like in the days, months, years following, you know? Like unless you
Yeah.
or I were probably to go to them and like ask a question, there was never anything else after that.
Well, the funny thing is like you heard one thing and I heard something too, and it's so funny, like, because this is an experience only me and you shared, and I
Yeah, yeah.
remember for me, I heard we were going to tell you in November, there was
Oh,
never a right time, and we didn't
yeah.
want people to look at you differently. Those are the three things that I remember them saying. And, you know, that, explanation, I think really shaped the trajectory of my future, you know
Yeah.
and where like I was 12 years old, I already felt out of place in school. My parents viewed us as different.
Mhm.
That's how I read it. And um yeah, like I think that really shaped a lot of my any efforts that I had made to fit in, or any progress that I had made to fit in. It just threw a wrench in. And obviously, in the immediate aftermath of that conversation, almost subconsciously, my attitude towards mom and dad dramatically changed.
Yeah, mine probably did too. I just wasn't really aware of it, obviously subconsciously.
What
I mean,
if you had to reflect maybe on like the ensuing couple of years afterwards? Obviously we all know what happened with me. Like, I started just kind of hanging out with people who, like the jocks and the partiers, and I
yeah.
kind of jumped into that culture. I believe, I mean, shortly thereafter, that's when I discovered alcohol for the first time.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and sometimes I think about that, where like, like I started drinking and I started getting into trouble. And, a lot of attention was just, I sucked a lot of attention out of that house after that. How
Yeah.
did that affect you?
Well, it's interesting. I feel like I was going to say something about the aftermath because for me in the aftermath of it, I kind of remember like I wanted to talk about it with people. And I remember I would like bring it up with like friends and stuff or, like cousins, our age, like peers. I don't know, maybe it was almost like I wasn't getting what I wanted to hear or like or it was like all I could think about. So it was all I was talking about. And it's like, you can't expect people that are 13, 14 years old to like want to hear about this all the time,
Or to
like,
understand it?
yeah, to understand it or to
Well, that
even
was
want to hear about it.
that was a big contrast with both of our approaches, because I didn't want to tell anybody about it.
Yeah, that was, and I do kind of remember that it was like it didn't seem like you wanted to talk about it, but I was like, it was all I could think about and wanted to talk about. And then I think from that, because it was all I wanted to talk about and people weren't maybe responding the way I wanted or I was expecting them to, that was probably like the start of me kind of like shutting down more and like turning more inwards. But I would say it was like a slow process. And obviously because you're so young, you're not even aware of like you're not capable of even thinking about your thinking. So
Mm.
that's not even something I saw until like adulthood, like early mid 20s kind of thing.
I mean, if there's one thing that you could have wanted for mom and dad to do differently in that moment, what would?
Like when they find, honestly, I'm not even sure. I don't know if it was about that moment for me, but maybe like if there had been more of an openness, like I said, we never really talked about it again. So I think if there had been more of an openness about it in general, where like they felt like they could have conversations where it didn't feel like it had to be something so secret and hush hush and we can't tell anybody and no one can know. Because I think
Yeah,
that's where you like bring shame into the picture, or just, you just feel like you have to hide something. And I mean,
yeah.
I
I
just
mean,
don't think that's ever a good
no,
thing.
I totally agree, and I think also like I've worked on this a lot over the past several years, just like kind of coming to terms with everything, and not even the several years. I would say the past like 4 or 5 years,
Yeah.
even like prior to me, getting sober. And one of the things that stuck out to me the most was understanding that it wasn't really about us; it was more about them. Like it
Yeah.
was the level of shame that they had towards mom's infertility, the level of shame that they had just as like that being like the nuclear family, and they were supposed to produce it naturally and they weren't able to. And then the other thing was also you know the way dad is. you
Yeah.
know and like I remember like efforts to discuss it with him were very different than efforts to discuss it with mom. When I was discussing with dad, he almost made me feel like he had done, like I owed them, like I should be grateful,
Yes.
and that's something where like now, yeah, like I am very grateful. you know they saved my life. When you hear my whole entire story, like they saved my life, and I am grateful. But one of the things that was missing, I think, from that experience was the apology, just a simple
Yes,
apology.
that's true.
And we have, that's something that I really think was, whether anybody wants to acknowledge. I mean, I'm sure dad wouldn't really just concede, but if you look at the timeline of my life, pretty much immediately following that, that's when I took a turn. you
Yeah,
know
I would agree.
and so what was it like watching me take that turn? I mean, you're still kind of trying to process this this huge thing that just happened. Meanwhile, you see me just kind of.
Yeah, the thing is, like, the biggest thing for me is I just think like so much of that, and just like our house, like the house that we grew up in general, like so much of it was like me becoming numb, to where like I wasn't really, and like I know this sounds like horrible to say, but I wasn't even really feeling that much because I don't even think I was capable of it. Like I wasn't even feeling much because I was so desensitized already. I mean, that
Yeah.
obviously like progressed, but like it definitely like started in those years, in like the aftermath.
Yeah, I mean, would you say that you were just like on guard, and you just any semblance of trust was just kind of destroyed?
Yes,
Like,
that's exactly what I would say. Like
yeah.
became more guarded, and yeah, and I think, yeah, my ability to trust anybody was like that was destroyed.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's why like me and you have always had this special bond, because regardless of what I was doing, like even like in those dark moments, like I knew I could always talk to you.
Yeah.
Like, and I think that's like one of the special bonds that we've always had. But yeah, like something I say often is where like I exploded, you somewhat imploded.
Yes.
Um, and would you I mean, are you okay with me saying that, first of all?
No, yeah, that's fine.
Um, and when you're watching me explode, and I think we both knew exactly why I was acting out the way I was. What was it like growing up? Like in high school, when your brother was always getting into trouble.
I mean, yeah, that was tough. And again, like it's hard to like describe feelings associated with it because like I said, I was already kind of like desensitized and like numb to a lot. But yeah, like it was definitely tough. Like you never know, like is the next call I'm going to get going to be some awful news about something that like terrible that happened to him. Like that's always in the back of your mind.
Were you ever like embarrassed of me?
I don't Honestly, I don't really remember ever feeling like embarrassed of you. Like obviously I wanted you to like get your shit together, but
Yeah.
I don't remember being embarrassed of you. I was at times I would, here and there I would get like angry cuz I would feel like
I
either
mean, I
mom and
told your
dad were
car.
like, what's that?
I mean, I told your car. I
Oh
would
yeah,
get in
there's like
trouble when
so
people
many
would ask
things.
you about it in school.
You what? Sorry, I didn't hear the last thing you
I would
said.
get. I said, I totaled your car. I would get in trouble and people would ask you about it in school. I mean, that
Yeah, luckily there wasn't a lot of that. I don't know if it's because like you were like part of the popular crowd and I like wasn't really. I mean, like I wasn't like unpopular, but I would say I was like well liked, but like I was not at all like part of the
yeah,
popular crowd and I didn't care. But yeah, I don't remember like tons of people. I just remember it reminded me of when I was working on yearbook senior year and Mr. Merritt, remember Mr. Merritt, was like
yeah,
handing me something and he said, "Can you please give this to Adam?" And somebody in the class, I don't want to like name people's names, but somebody in the class was like, "Oh my God." And because he had never realized that we were related and he was like, "Wow, you guys are like really different." And I was like, "Yeah, we are." But it was like hilarious. And I realized that, like, yeah, a lot of people probably maybe didn't even realize, except for like our close friends and stuff, might have never even realized we were related.
yeah. It's so crazy because like I remember like just walking around in high school and just seeing you, and like I'd give you like that head nod, like you're
Yeah.
just like
Oh, it's so
there,
funny. I don't even really remember that.
I remember I would do that.
That's
Um, so obviously, like when you graduated and you went to American University, you were away from the family.
yeah.
Uh, I mean, one of the things that we obviously never did at that time was ever go to therapy. I mean, I went to therapy because I kept getting into trouble, and I remember, my they mom and dad would make me go to therapy, and I went to AA early on with Brian because we got caught drinking all the time. But one of the things that we never really did was go to therapy and try to process what happened. So now you're going to college and your environment is changing again. Describe that.
It's funny because, I know that's something that a lot of kids struggle with when they're choosing a college or when they get to college. And if it's somewhere that's not nearby home, you're really missing home and struggling with that. But for me, it's funny because I didn't even choose any schools in Connecticut, and I think like that was subconsciously that was like, you know,
Get me the fuck out of here.
yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it was. It was like, I don't even want to be here. So, like, I didn't even have this is again, I always feel like I sound like a terrible person to say this, but it wasn't really difficult for me. I think in a way it was maybe like a safe haven for me because I was like, I don't have to deal with the dysfunction that's going on at home, whether it's parents, whether it's you, whether it's whatever. Like, I just don't have to deal with that.
Yeah, yeah. And you spent 4 years up there, but you chose psychology. And that doesn't escape me, that you chose psychology and
Yeah.
then you jumped into the transitional living therapeutic world. And that also doesn't escape me.
Yeah, yeah.
What was it that motivated you to get into that from the
Yeah, I mean, I know there's always like that. There's the quote about like people go into psychology to kind of like fix themselves. So, and I don't think I would have even like had the awareness to really like see that about myself then if that was the case. But I think I'm sure that like I'm certain that was like part of it to some degree, of
yeah.
yeah. Uh sorry, I just forgot the rest of your question.
No, I mean, like, why did you choose that field, and did you get what you wanted out of it?
Yeah, I guess it was after having taken like a psych like in kind of intro to psych class. I think it was my senior year. It was just like a very interesting subject to me, and it was maybe like the thing I was most interested in. I don't know. I think because of some of the trauma I was dealing with that obviously I wasn't dealing with really at that
Yeah.
time. Like I think I probably could have applied myself and done a lot better in school if I, had the tool.
Yeah. Meanwhile, like you're at school, kind of getting into a lot of trouble. Were they ever telling you about it when I was gone?
Sometimes, but that's the other thing is like, going back to like people really like missing, home when they're at school. I don't, I didn't even like call
Check
home that
in.
often from what I remember. It's not like
Yeah.
I was weekly calling in or maybe kind of weekly. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I wasn't like checking in. But I do remember like here and there I would hear stuff from them. Yeah. Like
Yeah.
about, something you had done or whatever.
What was like the most shocking thing you heard that I had done or gotten into? And when did you begin to worry about me?
I mean, I guess I was always worried, but the part of the thing is with with drinking and like with substance abuse in general is like of for a lot of people like it starts or it happens in your teens and then you kind of transition into like normal usage of those substances, beyond like your teens and like college years. But yeah, I guess I was just kind of maybe wondering like if that was going to happen or if it was already too late for you or what was going to happen. Maybe I already like could see that you were, an addict then, but I maybe didn't want to like admit it or say it out loud or anything.
Yeah, I mean, like, cause like a lot of the times, and now, I have a much better understanding of just kind of my journey and then like the recovery process. I do understand that, like when someone's in recovery and when they're active, it's a disease of the family,
Yeah.
and like I see now how dramatically it, shifted mom the most,
Yes.
out of any of us.
Yeah.
Except for me, obviously, but like mom the most.
Yes. I agree.
Because mom was always like that nurturing,
Yeah.
and like, but to a certain extent, she was also my biggest enabler. And I do sometimes attribute mom's enabling to the guilt that she felt from not telling us that we're adopted, where she would kind of just, I always knew that, regardless of whatever trouble I got into, I could give them a call,
Yeah.
and they would bail me out. And I pushed the limits to that. And, I did it so many times with, getting in trouble, getting kicked out of places. Um,
Yeah. And that
and,
kind of brings in a
but
little of like the anger I was speaking about earlier is like with their enabling, and not that I was feeling that all the time, but just something like some big thing happens and then you're like, God, you guys are just enabling him. Like you need to try something different, like
yeah,
maybe tough love or something. I don't know.
yeah. I mean, how would you describe your relationship with mom and dad? Like,
Again, I would say not I think partially because of obviously finding out we were adopted in that way and then also with like your continued struggles and like needing a lot of their attention or taking a lot of their attention. I kind of was just like very much left to my own devices or left on my own, you know? And it's funny because mom actually tried to have a conversation with me about this. I forget. I know I was home from college. I don't remember exactly what year it was. So sometime after 2007, where she basically, and I wish this is definitely a regret of mine that I kind of like brushed it off and said like, no, 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 that's not the case. But she was basically saying, like you essentially like raised yourself because we were always so busy with Adam. And
hmm,
I was quick to dismiss it then, probably because, I was so like desensitized and like numb that I couldn't even like actually see if it could be true. Like I wasn't even able to be like, yeah, you're right. But in the
hmm,
past like few years or so, I've really been like, yeah, she was actually true. And I really regret that I wasn't open and able to have that conversation with her at that point. It's definitely like a regret. 'Cause she,
yeah,
she started crying.
okay,
Yeah, she started crying and she said, like, yeah, you basically raised yourself. And she was, expressing her just like upset about that I had to do that. And I just wish I hadn't been like dismissive of it.
I mean, it's so funny because like like she's right. Like, I sucked a lot of energy out of that household. And one of the things that like I have very fond memories of mom like standing next to me at court dates and like driving me to like whatever an intensive outpatient or like crying when she had to drive me to rehab and
Mm.
the one thing that like I always say was that like both of our parents loved us, but they loved us in very different ways. Where
Yeah.
mom was the nurturer, and dad, supported us with obviously financially, but it was a very different dynamic. And I think, that's why I really had a special bond with mom, obviously.
Yeah.
So like, you know, obviously, in 2013 when she passed away, that was a period of my story where I was sober. I know I had gotten a DUI earlier that year. I had, and I remember when I had gotten arrested that time, she had already been diagnosed. And, you know, she had already been diagnosed, and like I was writing this. I think it might have been I might have laughed. That was crazy. I want to talk about like kind of that period of time in our lives when like mom was passing away, and we dad at that point had moved to Philly. Me and you were at the house. Remember Timmy, who was my sober friend, he was living with us too. What was that like for you, having essentially, as you acknowledge, kind of raised yourself? You're working this job that you liked, but I don't think you're really happy with it. Um,
Yeah, no, I wasn't.
and now, me and you are trying to balance how we're gonna.
Yeah, that was tough. Because I was at that, well, I guess that job was like a little before mom got sick, really. But um, yeah, I don't know. That was, sorry, I just lost my train of thought.
No, that's
Um,
fine.
yeah, I don't even, yeah, like that whole period. I guess I was, that's the thing. See, it's so hard for me to like actually come and like share an
Recall.
emotion. What's that?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, recalling also, like memory is like my memory isn't the greatest. It's like I'm good with like dates and stuff, and then actually recalling
Hmm.
like events and how I felt or whatever, that's a lot harder for me.
Well, I think in the moment, in those moments, like it was for me, it was very like going through the motions.
Yeah, I would say
Where
that's
like
probably the closest, that's probably the best way to describe it. Like you just kind of feel like you're going through the motions, like you're not even sure how you're supposed to be acting, like what am I supposed to be doing? Like what does it even look like to actually grieve? Because even to this day, I still feel like, did I ever even grieve? Like, I don't even know.
yeah.
I don't know what that's supposed to look like. It's different for every person, but who knows?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I remember like we would have this schedule where, I would be there
Oh yeah,
Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Sunday, Monday, Tuesday,
yeah,
and you would go like later on in the week
yeah.
because
That was
I was working in restaurants at the time.
yeah, that
So
was
like
tough
I
too.
had to be around weekends.
Yeah, yeah. No, that was tough too. I remember just like kind of finagling that schedule because I think I had just started a new job that January, and this was like the summer when we were, or like May, June, kind of July when we were like trying to implement that schedule. And yeah, I mean, again, yeah, just totally like numb. I was just kind of like going through the motions of like, this is what I have to do. I wish I had been more present for her. I would say that's like a regret.
Yeah. And what's your fondest memory of mom?
Like then,
What's your most fond memory of mom when she was healthy and then when she was not?
again, sorry, I'm kind of the worst when it comes to memories. Because sometimes it's like I don't even think of something until someone like says something and it reminds me of something. It's not even one specific memory, but just like how like fun and like silly she was. Like just how we were like always silly with her.
Yeah. See,
I would say that.
one of the things for me, and I was just like really, really angry. Like I was like really angry. Now I can acknowledge it as just anger. And during those year that mom was dying, I was mad at obviously like that we were losing her. I
Yeah,
was mad at every single extended family member. You know,
yeah,
I
I remember.
remember I was mad at people not visiting her. They
Yep.
were right around the corner. They would send stupid text messages. And I think that really was compounded with the fact that I was mad about every other family member being in on the lie of us being adopted. And that's where like I always, until that point had felt betrayed by like just like, because I felt like everyone was complicit in this huge lie,
Yeah.
and now mom's dying and no one's showing up for her. We
Oh, that's
had,
interesting.
like, so for me in my head, I'm just like, all right, like, fuck everyone,
Yeah, no.
um, and like we had Timmy coming with me, every weekend, and kind of being there for our family, and like that's where like I always felt that like, granted, our family lived in Connecticut, and a lot of the family that lived in Philly was like, you know, but like just putting that distance to us growing up was just like even like in that sense, I never really felt apart. And I think
Yeah.
even to this day, I probably also kind of feel like distant from certain people. But I mean, there's certain people who reach out to me, and there's certain people who don't. And that's okay now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I don't have any resentment. I don't have any will. I understand that everyone's busy, and everyone's doing something. But for a long time, especially leading up to mom's death, like I was very angry at extended family. Obviously, like Nancy and Nagels and the people who were present.
Yeah.
Um, like they were there. But for
Yeah.
me, like I think that's just like an underlying theme of just my life, like where it's like showing up always has always mattered to me.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
just like even and the irony in that was like I was getting drunk and doing drugs and doing all these things and I never really even was present.
Yeah.
So it's like now I kind of understand like
Who was I to be telling people to show up when I wasn't even showing up myself?
yeah, I mean I might have been there physically,
Yeah. Yeah.
like one of my fondest memories of mom during that time was when Mima died, and she was also in the hospital and they were saying that she couldn't leave, and mom was like, no, like I need to go to my mom's funeral.
Yeah.
And do you remember that?
I actually, for some reason, I'm not even sure. I must have been there, but I can't remember if I was actually at Mima's funeral or not. I know it was
I'm
the
pretty
end
sure
of
you were. And
2012.
mom had a walker, and we had to stand next to her and walk her to Mima. And that was so crazy, like, but it just like showed that like mom was the best at showing up for people. Like
Yeah.
she showed up for people, and I think that's like probably where I got it from, where it was like like I definitely got that from her, where it's like I mean, that's not to say that I'm good at showing up like to like family events, because I'm definitely not, but I like but like where it kind of came down to like the importance of showing up,
Yeah.
but another like memory was when she finally got and
Yeah.
I was with her that day,
I remember.
where
Yeah. I
like,
remember with her then.
and somebody had to be there that day, and I was there. That was probably the hardest day, because I knew it was the last time we'd hear her voice.
Yeah.
Um, and like that's also something I treasure. Also, being the last person to hear her voice. You know,
Yeah.
um,
Wow.
so like that's something that like I never really like.
I never even really thought about it like that. Yeah.
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 So obviously August 3rd comes along. Do you remember
Yeah. Well, I remember, yeah, so August 4th, it was that Sunday. Um,
August 4th? Yeah.
yeah, I remember probably I had kind of like gone to bed late or something, and I woke up to, it was actually a text from Philip that it was to both of us of like, I'm so sorry, guys. Like, I'm here if you need anything or something like that. But that was like, and then I kind of obviously knew immediately from that, but it was that I saw that text before dad had like called us.
Yeah.
And I know
Yeah.
he and Nancy were at the hospital obviously late that night, or the night before, obviously. But that was like, I saw that and then I must have, maybe there was a text from dad saying like, call me when you wake up or something like that.
Yeah. Like I remember that moment, and I was in Nantucket,
Oh,
and
right. Yeah.
I remember waking up to that, and
Yeah.
going downstairs and just being like, I gotta go, and
Yeah.
then catching the ferry back, and that long drive
Yeah.
by myself, and just knowing that like, and like I think that's just another thing where we just kind of spring into action. I picked you and Tim up
Yeah. I
and drove to
remember that.
Philly. After I had just driven 5 hours from Nantucket, four
Yeah.
hours from Nantucket, and like that was um, that was obviously like we had the funeral, and you guys had me do the eulogy. Um, that was even in those moments, like for me, like those things meant so much to me, where it's like all right, like mom and dad still, I mean dad and Amber still look at me to kind of almost lead, when like
Yeah.
really like I felt like I was the biggest disappointment in the family,
Oh, wow.
and but like in that moment, like having that opportunity was like super like meaningful to me. And I remember I spent like the whole night writing that speech, and like it was just like attributed to just like me and mom did have a really special relationship, and I'm not going to say that I was her favorite. No, I'm just kidding. uh one of the underlying things that we've kind of covered is that a lot of these things happened and you were in a space where you just kind of, you know, filed it, and, you know, you filed the event, the emotion, everything
Yeah.
to be reviewed later. So now, do you feel that, like, what would you prioritize now when, like, unpacking it? I mean, I know, me and you talk a lot about therapy, and me and you are like, we connect a lot about just like having deep conversations, and I'm really able to, because obviously, like, you are my part of my story, so there's a lot of things that we share that, I can't, like, emotions that we share, and that's
Yeah.
something special. You don't have that with a lot of people. How would you say that you've dealt with it?
I would say that for like I honestly like haven't fully still dealt with it, if I'm being honest, you know? So, yeah, it's something that it's a work in progress.
It's a work in progress, of course, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
And I think it's something you kind of do piece by piece.
yeah,
Like, for me, one of the big things was, like, obviously, like, having to get sober. Now I've been on this journey for a couple of years, and like, along the road, like, a lot of things had happened where, like, I had lost Lauren, I had lost all these people. When you look at me, what are your thoughts, like, in regards to just, like, my journey? Like, a lot of the reason why, like, I had you on was for people to have also, like, a better idea of who I am as the host of this podcast.
yeah.
um you've seen my journey from the beginning. So what when you saw that I was, like, serious this time around, because there are so many times that I tried and failed, and I had given you and the rest of the family a lot of false hope. In those times of the false hope, how did you compare this time to then?
That's a good question. I'm trying to like remember back to, a couple years ago when you were first getting sober. I remember at the time, like a couple years ago, I kind of remember noticing that it wasn't just like in the past, maybe you would say like, I'm sober, but I would still see a lot of like the other kind of addict behaviors from you. But this time around, I noticed like other changes that you were like implementing in your life, whether it was something getting on a good sleep schedule, you know what I mean? Like something I had never seen you do before. Like
Hmm.
I saw you implementing like a lot of other smaller and big changes like into your life. So I think that was like the biggest thing that I saw. And just being kind of like in awe and really impressed that you've been able to, to go through all of that, however many times you tried to get sober and, whether it was the right time or not, or whatever, like finally take control and do it for yourself,
Yeah.
and just, being really
what
proud of you.
Whenever, like, I would do it in the past and and, like, you'd see those behaviors come back, like, how did that make you feel?
I think I just had kind of already grown to be like skeptical, like skeptical of whether it was ever going to happen or not.
Mm, okay. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because, like, I feel like as we grew up, like, our roles changed, where you were, like, the older sister, and, then I kind of became, like, the protective younger brother almost,
Mm.
and it's funny because, now I look at our relationship and the way it's evolved, and it's on such a different level than it's ever been, because, like, I can be present for you.
Yeah, yeah,
um what are you, now you're, we have the distance between us, and
yeah.
we have dad. I do want to talk about our relationship with dad a little bit without beating him up too bad. And, it's funny because now dad, as a single parent, the way he's evolved, like, dad was always, like, one of the guys who, like, softened the blow for me. I mean, mom was always softened the blow with dad. Now,
Yeah.
as we see him get older, I've alluded to the fact that dad is, on previous episodes, how dad is somewhat of a old country, can be controlling.
Yeah.
I might have even used the N word on other episodes, where he has displayed sometimes being a little bit narcissistic when it comes to certain things. But, the one thing I know about dad is that he, like, loves us so much.
Yes.
He does,
Yes, yeah.
and and our relationships are very different. Like, I know your relationship with dad is very different than my relationship with dad. now. But we both set boundaries with him. Why do you think it's so important for us to do that with
I mean, not using the N word, but I feel like that's what you have to do. He kind of does have the tendency, even if separate from, like, let's say the N word, um,
Yeah.
to you've talked about it a lot, like, treat us still like we're little kids. So that's like one
Yeah.
reason you have to definitely enforce those boundaries. So yeah, that's
One of the things that I've like discovered about like managing dad is like just be if you're straight up with him, you like he's very straight up with you,
I don't think I've
and
ever
like
done that with him. For some reason, like, I just haven't gone to the places where you have of being like straight up with him like that.
I know because like our personalities, I feel like sometimes I like look at the way that like now the roles that I'm taking on and the people I'm communicating with and how I need to approach it, and I kind of understand why dad is the way he is because he is programmed to be this like business executive.
Yeah,
So like growing up, homie managed the family the same way he managed business,
yeah, a
and
lot of
like
discipline.
that and I get it, but like he's a very black and white type of person,
Yes.
and how being like an old country kind of guy, like I told him the other day that I was going to a meeting, and he goes, "Oh, would you start drinking again?" I'm like, "No, like you consistently go to these things, dad, like that's how it works, you show up, you keep going."
Yeah,
And he was like, "Oh, okay." And like it was just like so funny because like he has no clue,
yeah,
and it's not because he doesn't like he like I think there's certain concepts that people can wrap their head around, and there's certain concepts that you can't. But like if I
yeah,
need to talk to him about like finances, or if I need to talk to him about like just like what decision would he make here, whether it pertains to business or it pertains to just like a relationship, more likely professional relationship, like he does give sound advice. And that's where I've found with dad, like there's things that he's good at and there's things that he's not good at.
yeah.
And and it's so funny because I watch you guys interact, and I'm like, oh shit, like they're just like it's like I don't know who hasn't adapted to who.
Probably
Dad's
both of
not
us,
gonna
because I
adapt,
definitely, yeah,
so I think like when I started to accept the fact that Dad's not gonna fucking change, it made it
yeah,
a lot easier for me to just be like, all right, dude, like let's agree to disagree. I'm
yeah.
gonna
Maybe
move on.
I guess I probably get like too emotional to,
Yeah, you lead with emotion with Dad, and
yeah, I need to like take that out, or yeah, and start doing
yeah,
the way
dude,
you're doing.
you definitely gotta take it out because like that's the thing. Like you almost can't show emotion around it. Like
Yeah, you
you
would think I would
almost
know
can't.
that by
Yeah,
now.
like with him, you just gotta be like, hey, and when he starts getting feisty, you just get up. All right, well, cool.
Yeah, that's
Like
probably like,
you would say your piece. Like sometimes he doesn't fight fair. Often when he doesn't, and you all right, he he fights the way he fights, and but if you go back at him, it's just gonna get worse. No, for me, it's like, all right, like I'm not gonna be able to change his mind. You know,
yeah,
and that's something that I've like kind of accepted, and I just let him do his thing. And I would say me and his relationship is like healthier than ever because I've learned to just like be like, all right, man, like I got 2 hours today. You know,
yeah. I mean, you probably,
and
yeah, you see, you do set those boundaries with them, but you've probably have more of like, I mean, I know you're closer, like physically closer to him, but like more of a relationship with him than I do, because I don't really go to him for much,
yeah.
I feel like unless I
Well, the
have,
thing is like we're at this stage where he's getting older,
yeah,
and like we've already lost one parent. That's how I look at it,
yeah. No, I do think about
and
it like that, but
and he lost his wife, and I
yeah,
think for like when I in the moment, I didn't really real his lived experience was, and that's something that like helped me also get over the whole adoption thing, was when I finally had a conversation. And I think I talk about this. I've talked about this before. It's like where I was like, "Hey, man, what were you and mom going through?" And
yeah,
I told you about this. I called you right after we had
yeah,
that
yeah,
conversation, and like that, like I got it.
yeah,
Like it made especially having like a better understanding of trauma and working through my trauma, where where like I was like, yeah, like that must have been super traumatic for them too, you know.
Yeah.
And that's something where I'm just kind of like, all right, like I can understand that. And Dad's just a fucking weirdo, man. Like he's great, but like like I love him. He's just not gonna change, Like he's an old head who does his thing and loves his kids a lot, but also is just him, you know.
Yeah.
Um, as you know, we're obviously gonna grow old together, and chart this path, whatever paths we chart. What is the thing that you most value about me as your brother? We'll just start there. What is the thing that you most value about me as your brother?
Well, this is something you kind of touched on earlier, but how you said we were always close, you were talking about it when we were kids, but I think yeah, part of it is because of all the shit that we've gone through together. Just know that at the end of the day, I can always come to you, count on you, depend on you, talk to you about anything.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And
I think that's like the
well,
number one.
yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's like I'm now in a position where like I can actually be a brother,
Yeah.
and I think, for you, like I wasn't the greatest brother for quite a while. I was selfish and I was just not considerate about what you were going through, and I just wasn't present. And that if the tables were turned, I probably would have felt pretty hurt,
Yeah.
and I probably would have felt abandoned and sad, frankly, and so like I can't imagine what you had gone through having me as your brother for as long as you did, but like I'm grateful to have you. I'm grateful that you were willing to do this podcast. And given that the name of it is Finding Purpose, I kind of want to ask you, what advice would you give to someone on the journey to finding their purpose?
Oh wow. I don't know because I don't even know how much of it comes from like finding your purpose. How much of it comes from like the experiences that you've had and like the life that you've lived, and finding it kind of along the way. I guess like being open to everything that comes your way and having grace with yourself. I think that's
Mm.
one thing all of us could do, could benefit from.
Yeah, I love that. I want to thank everyone for listening to this episode. Kind of gives you a bird's eye view from my sister, who's sitting on the sidelines for much of my story, and who shared this lived experience that I oftentimes share in other episodes with all these other wonderful guests that I've had in the past. And Amber, I'm really grateful that you joined today. And I don't know, I'll see you in the holidays, I guess.
Yeah, I'll see you when I see you.